Welcome back, everybody. You're looking at live pictures of the U.S. border crossing in El Paso, Texas, there on your screen. President Trump is still threatening to shut down the southern border, that being part of it, as soon as next week. And if he decides to follow through, the effects could be felt almost instantly. The New York Times reports that Americans could see, quote, immediate and uncontrollable spikes in the cost of foods like bell peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, and your beloved avocados. And according to the Times, it would take less than 1 week to disrupt American auto production, including for companies like Ford and Toyota. Congressman Mike Levin of California joining me now to talk more about this. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Very much appreciate it. Really important subject matter, obviously, to address. I want to start with this new reporting from the Washington Post, Congressman, that House Democrats are considering a vote on Trump's plan to close the border to ramp up pressure on Republicans. What are you planning to do to stop this? And can you stop it at this point?
Well, we have to acknowledge that this would be catastrophic for border communities all across our country and really for our entire country. You know, I represent an area that has San Diego, and San Diego has $250 billion a year in economic activity that's directly related to cross-border trade. We're talking about $1.6 billion a day, and as your graphic showed there, we're talking about increases in consumer prices really overnight. And this is something that should not be partisan. Democrats and Republicans can both acknowledge the importance of our cross-border relationships, and this is something that would be really catastrophic. We have to do everything we can, whether it's a vote or other actions, to make sure, number one, that the public's aware that we can't just shut down the border. And, you know, I've been to the border. Many of us on the Democratic side have been to the border, and what I saw was to the extent there's a crisis, it's one that's being exacerbated by this administration's policies. We've got to treat people with respect and dignity and decency again, not just shut the border down, not throw a temper tantrum. It didn't work when we shut down the government. It didn't work when he declared a national emergency, and it won't work if he shuts down the border either. That's not the way you govern. You govern by getting things done, by working across the aisle and trying to come up with solutions for the American people, and again, following up with a long tradition of treating people from different countries with humanity, decency, and respect.
Congressman, you say that this issue should not be a partisan one. We have heard that this entire hour, to say the least. All the issues that we've been covering should not necessarily be partisan ones, but they certainly are. Can you be so sure that your Republican colleagues are going to not back up the president on this?
Well, I can only hope they'll take a look at the economic impact that such a measure would have on their districts, on their local economies.
You can only hope, but have you heard from your Republican colleagues on this at all? That they support or if they don't support the president on closing the borders?
I'm going to keep trying, Yasmin. I'm going to try to have a reasonable, thoughtful discussion with anyone who will listen, whether they be Republican or Democratic, about the economic impact that this measure would have. Again, it would be catastrophic, and we absolutely cannot allow it to happen. We can't throw a temper tantrum. We've got to try to fix the underlying issues. And again, that's the problem with taking all the resources away that we're sending to Central America. Is that's not going to solve the problem either. That's only going to make things worse. Let's get back to treating people with respect and decency. You know, you wouldn't know it from looking at me or from my last name, but my grandparents on my mom's side were Mexican immigrants, and they came to this country on the premise that we treated people from all around the world with respect and decency. That's got to be the driving force for our policy, not stoking fear and division by putting up barriers where they shouldn't exist.
Congressman, quickly, the president is going to be visiting the U.S.-Mexico border on Friday, I believe. What is he likely going to hear from people at the border?
Well, it depends who he actually speaks with. If he speaks, as I did, with people at Customs and Border Protection who are actually trying to solve the problem, then he's going to hear that we need more personnel, we need more scanning technology, and that's what we, as House Democrats, have agreed to do. In fact, that's what we did as part of the appropriations process. We want smart border solutions that actually work. We don't want to build a wall. We actually want to get to the problem, whether it's the drugs that are coming in. We want to make sure that we've got that scanning technology, whether it's trying to treat asylum seekers with respect and decency and dignity. You know, a wall is not going to solve people who are just begging for a better opportunity at a decent life, trying to flee from political persecution or violence. We're not going to stop that. When people are saying, please help me, a wall isn't going to stop that. Only humane policies will deal with that situation.
All right, Congressman Mike Levin, thank you so much, Congressman. Good talking to you.
Thank you,
we
Yasmin.
have been talking a lot about what would happen if the president tries to close the border. But is that even possible? To help me break all this down, I'm joined now by Paul Schmick, a former DHS and TSA training specialist. Paul, thanks so much for joining me on this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Can you close the entire U.S.-Mexico border, and does the president even have the authority to do so?
He has the authority to do so. The challenge for him is what that looks like economically, what that looks like for the Northern Triangle countries that immigrants are starting to move forward. But legally he can, and historically presidents before him have done that. The Immigration Act of 1952 and 1965, the amendment, give him the authority to do that, and we saw that with the partial, with the visas that we saw in 2017 with the partial border shutdown.
There's a possible plan to maybe bar passenger vehicles, but not commercial trucks, to avoid, you know, what I was talking about with regards to bell peppers and avocados and all the imports that are coming into this country from South America, from Central America, that sort of thing. How would that work, and could that be something that the president could institute?
So there's about 700,000 workers in Texas that would be impacted by a shutdown economically. So what you have to look at is you have to look at the security element of it, and if he's just going to shut out, we're going to say commercial, he's going to hurt the business community, so he will get blowback there. Just like we saw with the government shutdown, right? We saw blowback in the aviation community.
Yeah.
So it's just how much can he take, and he has been Teflon. We just talked about that in terms of things sticking to him, and his base supports him. And we can't get away from the fact that there's not a humanitarian issue there.
Yes, I'm so happy you bring this up. Go ahead.
So what I think is important to look at, there's really three variables here, Yasmin, that you have to look at. You have to look at the humanitarian issue, you have to look at the safety and the security issue, and you have to look at the economic impact. My view is when you take all of those variables into place, and I think this is where the president and the administration could do better in terms of calculating that, is we're either going to pay for it and deal with it on our border, or we're going to increase the humanitarian aid and what we can do and work with those Northern Triangle countries so that it doesn't end up here. We're going to pay one way or the other. We're not going to get away from it.
The thing is, we know this president well, and we've been watching him for 2 years now. He is going to do whatever means is necessary to get something done on immigration, because he believes it is a crisis, and it is going to be his #1 campaign issue going into 2020, because it seems like healthcare is not necessarily going to work well for him. Does that worry you?
No, it doesn't. What worries me is we do need Mexico's help. We should not go in all of this alone.
Will we get it?
I think he's going to claim victory for whatever they offer. He cannot take a loss here. He cannot be 0 for 2 in 2019 with this border issue, because he's risked a lot in the name of border security. He cannot go 0 for 2. All
right, Paul, I just got a word in my ear that Sarah Sanders is actually speaking outside the White House right now, so we want to go there.
Security clearances of people who were deemed potential risks?
I'm not aware that he did, but what I can tell you is I'm not going to get into individual security clearances, but what the Democrats are doing is playing a very dangerous and a shameful game, frankly. They're asking for personal, private, and confidential information from individuals that they know that they have no right to see, and they're putting the 3 million people that do have a security clearance at risk. If you put and exploit one individual, you're putting all 3 million people's personal information at risk, and that's shameful that they're doing that. We've worked with Democrats. We've cooperated with them throughout the process. We showed them documents that have to do with the security clearance process. We went over to the Hill and walked them through that. We invited those individuals and their staff to come to the White House and sit down with administration officials and walk through that. We'll continue to cooperate, but they can't ask for information that they know they legally have no right to see.
Sarah, but can you assure us that in instances where they did decide to override a denial, that they followed protocol? Because her concern is that they would override these decisions, not explain why, and not even acknowledge the red flags. I mean, is the White House taking shortcuts with national security?
Not at all. Again, there is a process we're following. I'm not going to get into individual security clearances. We know that we have, we have a policy here at the White House not to discuss individual security clearances. Again, we are cooperating with Democrats. We're walking them through what that process looks like, but we're not going to exploit individuals and their personal information at the hands of Democrats who want to play political games.
The border, you said it might be the best decision to close the border, but when you talk about the commerce that flows to Mexico and from Mexico back into the U.S., is the White House concerned at all that there are risks, real economic risks, with shutting down the border?
Certainly, we don't want to see, this isn't our first choice. Our first choice would be for Democrats to actually sit down with us and help fix a broken system to address the national security and humanitarian crisis that exists at our border. We're at a breaking point, and they have left the president absolutely no choice. The president has spent the last 2 years helping build up this economy and helping create the boom that we have. He certainly doesn't want to hurt that, but at the same time, his #1 job as the president is to protect life and to protect Americans. And he's going to do that. And he's going to make sure that he makes choices, even on the hard days, because that's what he was elected to do in order to protect that. Democrats, they're perfectly fine letting people having open borders and letting people come into American communities, whether we know who they are or not, whether we know whether they want to do good things or not. In fact, what they're doing is exploiting the very most vulnerable people across the globe, women and children. We know that a large percentage, up to 31% of women who make that treacherous journey are sexually assaulted. We know that 60% or more are violently attacked. That is awful. Why would we incentivize that type of process to continue to happen? The president wants to stop it. He wants to protect those individuals, and he wants to protect American lives.
What is the date that the president has in, what is the date that the president has in mind?
From Press Secretary Sarah Sanders at the White House addressing individual security clearances and the issues surrounding that, attacking Democrats for issuing subpoenas with regards to those security clearances and what's going on there. Also saying that you can't ask for information with regards to these security clearances. It is not lawful. So we heard that. She was also asked about border crossings and about closing the border, which I was actually just speaking to Paul Schmick about. And Paul, I want to bring you back into this conversation once again. She said the president has no choice here but to do just that. And she actually addressed the humanitarian issue as a reason why they should close the border.
So cutting off aid makes this worse. It's very difficult to see someone that would see a different angle of that conversation. So we can consider it getting worse until we work with the Northern Triangle countries, and we'll see what happens. The story's still being written on this, so we'll be back talking about it.
Does the president have a choice? Does he have a choice?
Yes, he does. He does. We will exhaust CBP resources who are already overextended, and he cannot deploy federal troops on U.S. soil. He's got to use the National Guard.
Thanks for sticking with me, Paul.
Sure.
All right.